Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glomberger channel. Strange music show that looks about, just about anything, right? I kind of feel like if it's something that can be heard, then it can be reviewed. So what are we looking at today? Well, we're looking at some, just nice metal drone music. A rather simple little release that I think is just kind of charming and delightful for simply being exactly what it is and nothing more. Just pure metal drone that just lets you indulge in wonderful chaotic discordance of amplifier worship for 20 minutes. A rather simple premise for a release, and thus this is going to be a rather short episode, but it's just one that I wanted to review since discovering it. So today I present Maze by the Dragonauts. So, who are the Dragonauts? Well, this is a duo comprised of members CMS and one Julian Fleming, who is the owner and curator of Econore Records, as well as releasing music under the moniker of Jean's Beast. So, what is Maze then? Well, Maze is a cassette release from 2021, released on Econore Records as just mentioned, a label that we did take a dive into when we had a look at Rob Michalchuk's album. So as well as purchasing that release, and as well as an album by Jean's Beast as well, like on a CD that I've been meaning to get around to reviewing, I also purchased this one. Purchased this based purely on the name itself, the Dragonauts, a band name referencing sleep, right? So when I first heard of it, I thought this is no doubt going to just be noisy, stonery distortion, right? Who'd have thought any less? And I was delighted when I first heard it because it was the exact kind of music I was expecting to hear, but also kind of cool in its own right. Just loud, noisy, distorted music. Still, I was kind of surprised with the rather cosmic, spacey vibe, hence why I wanted to try to discuss it on the show, so let's dive in. So opening up with Slender, this immediately just explodes onto the scene with a thick chunk of electric guitar-led distortion. A very lazy, slow riff emerged from the noise, and the distortion just creates this storm all around it, a blurry background for the lead guitar to just noodle around with its high frequencies. And from there, we kind of just simply get this rather lovely, enjoyable jam that just wanders off into the distance, leaving us completely surrounded by these dense layers of distortion and noise. And I find myself just loving the level of crunch that comes through on the guitar, the fuzz just being turned up to those delightful levels where you just want to close your eyes and feel the fuzzy vibrations. It's just interesting that these two musicians just jam away this very formless little droning composition, one that is dominated by the dual layers of distorted fuzzy riffs, all set against the maelstrom of noisy lo-fi distortion. And although there's nothing really else going on here arguably, there's just something oddly delightful about the composition though. I just find myself just wanting to close my eyes and doze off to the dense distortion. Let it surround me with that odd sense of static that comes from listening to heavy music. And as I do, my mind just wanders away, and I just envision these two individuals just chilling out, sitting up against their big amplifiers or standing around perhaps, I don't know, but just chilling, making heavy drone metal music. I think it's oddly fun. And when I listen to it, as heavy as it is, I actually find it oddly peaceful. Like, there's that heavy intensity you get when you listen to drone metal, but there's something delightfully charming and comfortable about the way it all sounds on this particular release. Like, I'm not held on the edge of my seat in that kind of quiet or nervous anticipation, but rather just lulled, thrown into a state of relaxation that heavy music can offer sometimes. And it becomes, as a result, a very easy little composition for us to hear, as there's just a wonderful sense of calmness, of just letting the instruments and pedals and amplifiers do their thing without rushing the process at any point. And each and every hit on the instrument, it just results in that wonderful deluge of fuzz that's so delightful to hear. I think it's charming, and a composition that I just get lost within every time I hear it, just slowly turning it up louder and louder, and hearing all of those effects at work. So from here you flip it over, and you move on to the next track, The Hedonist. And this feels a bit more like a thrashy drone, almost when it begins. The guitar just churning away with these wonderful low-ends that spin around in the cauldron as the second guitar plus plays some higher frequencies that slowly come into the mix. And I find the atmosphere on this one, especially after the delightful abstract noodling of the first track, feels maybe a little bit more tense at times, perhaps. The sort of chugging quality that guitar riff is established in the previous one, that's kind of missing here. It's just instead giving us this maelstrom of distortion effects and fuzz that just becomes louder and louder, like the storm threatening to tear us apart. And so although it's a bit of a different vibe in some respects to the first track, I still find it delightful to hear. The particulars of the guitar tones on this one just feel so oddly enough more satisfying than the previous track, and the form even more formless, which is kind of an odd thing to feel when you listen to it, but it's just what I get from it. I mean, whereas the first track kind of reminds me a lot of the early years of Earth, for example, this one kind of reminds me a bit more of the likes of Naja, where you got the slow thrashing of the guitar resulting in this cataclysmic storm of distortion and fuzz, where these very odd overtones slowly come into the mix and result in such a hypnotizing drone metal experience. It's almost as though our enjoyment of the first track has been overindulged in, and now we are victims of our own hubris, forced to deal with the ever-furthering descent of distorted metal drone in the form of this final track. I think it's oddly fascinating, and I'm not sure how intentional it was to produce the release with two contrasting compositions unified in their presentation of drone metal music. Not too sure, but it's certainly something I seem to find interesting and something I've observed from it after listening to it, with, especially observing it for this review, looking to it with a bit more detail perhaps. But regardless, I just think it's a wonderfully fascinating track, a dense storm of metal and fuzz that is just wonderful to throw yourself into for 20 minutes. Just metal music that you get completely lost in. And so essentially, the two halves that make up Maze by the Dragonauts here, an interesting release, as it's one that I don't think does anything majorly special or even new, but it is nonetheless something that just sounds very interesting and cool to me. I like that you've got the influence from the likes of Earth, Sun, Naja, and then of course Sleep, right? It just results in music that fans of drone metal are just likely to vibe with, I think. And here we just have these two dudes clearly chilling out, making some noise, and both having fun doing so, I think. And the result of their jams has created something that comfortably falls into the confines of drone metal, with the particulars of their tones being very pleasing and delightful to listen to and experience. Like I said, it's weird because I don't think there's a great deal going on, but I still just think it's pretty neat. Listening to this release just resulted in getting blown out by the drony metal musings of both CMS and Julian Fleming. Just 20 minutes of amplifier worship in the form of distorted guitars clambering over each other into delusions of noise and feedback. The whole thing, as mentioned, so delightfully formless, not really adhering mostly to the chunky riffs you'd often get from the genre perhaps, but instead just noodling around and letting the pedals and or the amplifiers just do the job for you. And it does become ambient in some respects, metal ambient perhaps, which is kind of what Dylan Carlson was aiming for on Earth 2. And with how it all comes together, you kind of get that sort of ambient vibe, that droning sensation. I don't think it quite reaches the same majestic levels of the likes of Earth or Sun. But to be fair, I don't actually think it's trying to, or even needs to. It's simply just this rather enjoyable little dirt, a tribute to the stalwarts of the genre, which makes sense given the name, right? Dragonauts. Clearly fans of Sleep, which, to me implies they both just enjoy playing music and feeling the physical effect as you play it. It's something that maybe worth mentioning that actually, off script time. But when you're playing distorted metal drone music, there's a wonderful sort of resonating effect of it when you're just standing by your amplifier and you feel that powerful presence that your guitar has and your amplifier has and the distortion effects has. And I wonder, maybe that's just what these two dudes like doing. Maybe they just like that effect when they play it, and that's why they like playing together. Maybe. Not too sure. That's just, inferences and stuff, but as of always, it's just the way we navigate these weird music episodes, isn't it? So yeah, I think with that we will just come to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. Now, as mentioned, a very short episode, but as mentioned, it's a very short album and not a lot here. But, regardless of how strange it is to try and review, I just like to write about things when the inspiration comes up. Whenever I get the draw to just go, what will the weird community make of this release? As well, I also just like to write about a wide variety of different things, and for some reason this just came up on my radar to try and write about. I've been meaning to, and here we are. But I do think it's a cool little release, fun to stick on if you get enjoyment from hearing people jam out to noisy metal. And so yeah, if you have made it this far, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. Let me know in the comments below of what other drone metal acts we should look at, especially if you know some more obscure ones, right? Let's expand our knowledge of the genre. And so yeah, I would wish you all the best. Hope you take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.